This is the magicwordpodcast.com.
Hello, this is Scott Wells for the magicwordpodcast.com. We are continuing our month of Boo, or our spooky season here in the month of October, by featuring another guest, one of whom that I chatted with whenever I was in Baltimore at the Pose Magic Conference. That was all about storytelling and how to make your presentations pop, how to make them better. And one of the speakers there was Kenton Knepper, who is my guest here today. And Kenton talks about a lot of things. Now, many of you may have heard of Kenton Knepper, or at least of Wonder Words, which he is most well known for, although he's written, over 20 books and has a brand new one out called Kenton Principles, which is a huge tome. I don't know how many hundreds of pages that it is, but it includes basically, I think, just about everything. I think if he died tomorrow, everything is in there. He wouldn't need to write another book, but he probably will, because he's such a brilliant person to talk with. And in that regard, I was listening intently to everything that he had to say. It was just so fascinating in talking about these wonder words, to the point where I was not just mesmerized, but hypnotized. And as I was looking at him and staring at him, and let me just say this. You don't want to miss the very end of this episode. Something unique happens, and I was going to edit this out, and Kenton had convinced me in his way that he does to make sure to leave this in. And I can explain a little bit on the backside of what had happened there, but it is very interesting and worth your time to listen to the entire podcast, so this way that at the end of this episode, you can perhaps understand why we had the ending that we do. Just kind of tease it a little bit that way. Well, there are a lot of stuff that's going to be discussed here this week, and you will learn as you listen and enjoy this week's podcast. Please do, because it's nothing less than epic. It's really good. Something special just for you in this season of Boo. So please welcome my guest, Mr. Kenton Knepper, here on The Magic Word. Today really gives me a great pleasure to speak with someone who has been a longtime friend, someone we rarely, I rarely get to spend some personal time with, and so I'm glad that we get a chance here today, and someone that you know who is known and famed worldwide amongst magicians and mentalists in particular with his wonder words, and so I don't know how carefully I need to choose my words to talk with him today. Here he is, my friend from Arizona, Kenton Knepper. Hey, Kenton.
Hey, Scott. Great to be with you.
Very good to have you here then, too. It is. I'm glad we finally get to sit across from each other, because so often that we have been apart, and so.
Yeah, our paths cross over and over and over again, and we never seem to have a moment to sit down together, right?
That's right. So I'm so glad we get a chance then to actually do that now and share some time together as well. I mentioned Wonder Words. That's something that kind of thrust you into the limelight of the mentalism world, I guess, back in what year? 90s or the 90s?
Yeah, something like that. I think actually chronologically, Colossal Killer came out. Well, it was not called that then. It was called Kenton's Close Call.
Yeah.
That was the first big push, and then after that came Wonder Words.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been, like 30 years now, something like that, when that came out.
Well, the Colossal Killer was something that you had come out with, then really, I guess you performed for yourself and then made commercially available. Is that right?
Right, yeah. It's something I performed out of necessity. It wasn't because of mentalism. I was doing a lot of close-up work in a grind situation. And so, after a while, you realize, okay, I think I know all the outs in the world, and then something happens and you think, well, I've got to have an answer for that too. And it took me about a year or so of trying all sorts of crazy things until my subconscious woke me up at 3 a.m. and said, "Here's the answer." And I went, "Well,
yeah,
okay, fine." So that's how it came about. And then my friend and mentor Larry Becker said, hey, let me help you tweak this a little bit, and I know how to get those wallets made that you want. And Carl Langdon is the guy that gave me the pattern for the wallet. It was made, some people, big history buffs of magic will know Carl Langdon, but Carl had made this idea of this wallet out of a cardboard piece, and it just molded this thing years before, and showed it to me when I told him about Killer, and he said, well, nobody knows about this. You can have it made like that. And it was now what they call the Shogun wallet or the Colossal Killer wallet, but it came from Carl Langdon. And the thing that Becker and I changed was we wanted to put in like slots and things, to make it easier to deal with later. But yeah.
Was Carl in Phoenix area
Carl
also?
was in Phoenix. He was, I forget what his stage name was, but you'll see like his name in the old like Linking Rings and things, because he was touring and everything else, and then wrote articles off and on in all the major magazines, and sometimes under his stage name and sometimes just under,
As an aside here right now, since we're talking, this is late 2022, how is Larry Becker doing, by the way?
I haven't seen Larry face to face
in a while
for a little bit because I had talked to April, his wonderful wife.
She's lovely,
and said, "Hey, I want to come by," and she said, "Oh, well, that'd be great." Then the pandemic hit.
Okay, so you haven't seen since.
So I haven't seen him
pre-pandemic
for a while. Yeah, and he
was developing Alzheimer's.
He's developed. Yeah, so that's the problem basically at this point is that. But the last, it's been some years. The last time I saw Larry, they actually wanted to hire me to do something at their house for this big party.
Oh, really?
And I didn't want to let him.
Flattering.
And he insisted, so we did. And he didn't want to have a picture taken together. He goes, "We don't do that. We're friends." I said, "We still need to document these things." He goes, "Well, we're friends. We don't need to do that."
Yeah.
But we did I talked him into it. So I have a picture from that night with him dressed as a doctor.
Okay.
Because it was
really?
a Halloween
like in a lab
thing.
coat or something?
Yeah, and with a stethoscope around his neck.
Dr. Becker. Okay.
But, it was so fun because I got to do close-up, for all their guests, and Larry said, I'm getting rid of a lot of stuff and everything. I said, well, where are your wards? Where do you have them? And he goes, "Oh, you want to see some?" And I went, "Yeah." He goes, "Why? It doesn't matter." I said, "Well, I'm just curious."
Yeah.
He goes, "Okay." He goes, "A lot of years ago, I used to keep some of them out." He goes, and he opens up this chest of drawers and starts pulling out drawers, and they're just stuffed with awards.
Oh, boy. Wow.
And he went, "Yeah." He goes, "My ego doesn't need any help, so I don't keep them out."
It's not like what it used to do when we were younger. It was kind of nice to have these kinds of accolades and everything.
Yeah,
so
and I still appreciate that. But I think it was like, hey, I know who I am. I don't need the ego boost.
And where I am in the world of what I have accomplished as far as leaving a legacy that he has.
Yeah, huge legacy.
Yeah. I assume that you have been influenced by him to some degree or another.
Oh, certainly, yeah. And, I said to Larry, "Hey, you don't know how surreal this is," because I was a kid working in a magic shop.
Easley's?
No, this was back when I lived in Iowa, and I was selling his first book to people to get them into mentalism. And he went, "Oh, you're the person."
The person, yeah.
I said, very funny. He said, "No." He said, "For a while, the first book, Super World, Mentalism,
right,
did not sell for a long time. It took a while for it to catch on, but there are little pockets, and he goes, apparently you're one of those pockets that made it work."
That's true. Mentalism has taken a long time to come of its own, certainly, because I recall whenever Banachek and I had first come out with Radio Magic, and I was trying to get that sold and marketed, and that was 1987, and we spoke to Joe Stevens, and he said, "Well, mentalism is not hot. I mean, that's not somebody, and who knows, nobody knows Steve Shaw or anybody." And he said, "I don't think I can sell many, so I'll buy some, but I'm not going to be the one who will be your jobber for you, basically." And but at the time, Larry Becker was the only guy, and he had his videos, remember, from the Greater Magic Library of Joe Stevens. Yeah. And that was influential to me, certainly. Larry was the first one that I had known before I met Banachek. York, in fact, and had done several of his things. He gave my own presentations of some of his ideas and things you can incorporate to do magic show, and then put a little bit of mentalism in there then too. It's just very commercial stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up with, I had teachers that were very eclectic. I had a teacher that was a gospel magician, and they had a 2.5-hour stage show.
So this was in Iowa.
This was in Iowa.
Yeah.
I grew up with that. He later became the head of the president of the Christian Magicians Association.
FCM.
And things, FCM. So I toured with them. But on the other hand, I had an atheist hypnotist magician who did burlesque magic, and he was also a mentalist. Okay. Right? So I had that teacher too.
Quite
and then sometime they all worked together, so it was really interesting.
Yes.
And so I had that kind of background, and I understood from reading, Orv Meyer and Norman McGill and, and Tarbell, and being around these teachers, mentalism was just a part of magic, and that was
correct.
Not unusual.
Right.
We know back in those days, if you had a magic catalog, there was a section in the magic catalog that had mentalism in
Always
it.
with a picture of caricature drawing with a guy with his hand to his head, or with some lightning bolts coming out.
Right, lightning bolts coming out with his head still apparently hurting. We've still got headaches.
Still got headaches, exactly, in all of our promos.
Yeah. That, or we're desperately reaching out at people. I don't know.
That's
right.
It's
strange. But so I was very fortunate. I ended up in Phoenix. I had no idea that Becker was out there, or Robert Blumley, Dr. Juris was out there. I had no idea. It was Blumley, Dr. Juris, that got Becker and April to move out there.
That's right. I'd forgotten that.
I was doing close-up magic and doing pretty magic and illusions and things when I first moved to Phoenix.
Why Phoenix from Iowa? I mean, of all places. I'm sorry to kind of derail you there.
It's the craziest thing. I always knew I couldn't stay in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, because as much as I liked certain things, it was way too small town for my crazy attitudes and ideas and the illusions and everything. I thought, I can't be famous and be here, So I went, I was with a girlfriend at the time, and we said, East Coast, West Coast. If we go West Coast, it's, LA or maybe Vegas. And then a guy that used to work on my show came back to Cedar Rapids and said, why don't you think about Phoenix? And I said, isn't that the old Dick Van Dyke show was like the new one, the second one was in Phoenix? That's a bunch of desert. And he went, no, it's a big city. It's a huge city. You have no idea. So we went, okay, maybe Phoenix. And then we said, we don't know which one, but we're going to leave it up to, see if we get a sign of where to go. Yeah. My girlfriend's mother got sick the next day. We went to go see her in the hospital, and in the lobby on the table were a bunch of Phoenix magazines. And we went, guess we're going to Phoenix.
Must be a sign.
So that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when I got there, I turned on the radio, and I heard Stevie Nicks and the Tubes and Alice Cooper, and they all went, oh, these are local, people. And I went, seriously? So like a lot of my music influences are from Phoenix or lived in Phoenix.
Right.
And so I went, I guess I'm home. And in a couple years, I was talking to guys, and they were going, oh, you're a thinking magician. That makes you a mentalist, which I think is horrible, by the way. I think that's not true at all. But back in the day, they used to think that. And so I ended up getting invited to talk about words and influence and things for the 6.5. Which
because you had a psychological background, or
psychology background, and I was talking about words and things that everybody went, "What the hell is that?" We never heard of anything like this.
Right.
So that was Blumley and Becker. Larry got talked into it because Blumley thought it was a cool idea. It would be interesting to do that. There was this guy, Doc Hilford, that talked me into going to talk to the 6.5. And the next thing I knew, they said, you're a mentalist. You need to be with us. So I got into the 6.5. And, Mark Strivings is here where we are right now currently. And it was, at that time, all of us had moved to Phoenix without planning on it.
Mark lived in Phoenix at the time then, too.
It was Doc Hilford, Larry Becker, Dr. Juris, Robert Blumley, Mark Strivings, me, Gene Urban. I mean, it was Chris Caldwell.
Did Lee Earl live there?
Lee Earl. I mean, it was crazy, right?
Yeah.
So that just kind of everything conspired to do that.
What was the 6.5?
Well, so the 6.5 was the group. The joke was it was called the 6.5 because it was twice as exclusive as the Mystic 13.
Okay, that's kind of where I was thinking is going.
And at one point, the Mystic 13 actually sent us a legal letter suing us,
no
saying
kidding.
we can't say we're half as or twice as exclusive as the Mystic 13. But it was it was, you know, everybody imagined, because the 6.5 would get together and meet, you know, once every several months or whatever. And everybody assumed we'd get together and work really hard on these heavy-duty mentalist ideas. And what really happened was we told jokes and made fun of each other, and it was the contest eventually to see who could make Larry Becker fall off his chair laughing. And when that happened, we'd go, okay, I guess the meeting's over, and that's how it ran. So we just had a marvelous time. Larry had just a hilariously devious, funny sense of humor, and, you know, all really smart guys. So we just came up with, you know, crazy, funny insults for each other until we just couldn't stand it. And, you know, and anytime we had to perform together, it was like, okay, we got to stop now because we're crying, laughing so much, and we have to get on stage. And that's literally how Maxwell talked us into doing the Desert Brainstorm seminar series of videos that became DVDs and now downloads. Was that, you know, it was like, you guys are insane together, you know, let's get you all in one place and record.
Did you guys start coming up with some different ideas? Was that the intent of actually having that group of the 6.5 as far as...
Yeah, it was kind of a way to test ideas, right? To say, hey, I have this new thing, you know, what do you think? Larry would come in and say, I have a new thing, and we would say, oh, is it laminate or leather? Because for a long time, that was kind of what he was selling, was either something that was leather or something that was laminated. But what happened is Larry and I became such good friends that when Colossal Killer Close Call started coming out, he said, let's go to Brad Burt's Magic Shop and do a little lecture. And you can talk about the word thing, even though you don't have anything to sell them about that. We can sell them killer. And you can start seeding into their minds this idea of what, of course, later became Wonder Words. And we were on the plane, which was, you know, it's like a maybe an hour flight to go to Brad Burt's in San Diego's at the time. And we got on the plane, and Larry said, hey, you know, I love buying all this crazy, you know, stuff. I got these pirate coins, you know. Come up with something for me. Like, how would I convince somebody that there'd be a date on there that somebody thought of that would be on that, like, pirate coin? Well, so basically, I talked Larry into what became Time Machine on the flight. So that got created. Another trick, Southwest Miracle, got created in air on that flight.
Was it on Southwest Airlines?
Yeah, that's why it's called Southwest Miracle. We were on Southwest Airlines. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. So, you know, we came up with like 3 things in that hour flight, just from us talking, that were mainly word, you know, related.
I know that Larry had come from an advertising background, and he had, I guess, sold his business when he had moved out to Phoenix because he was no longer really working in the advertising business, right?
Yeah.
Right. So he was really converting his full-time and effort to mind reading and mentalism.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And starting to work with Lee Earl eventually.
Yeah,
and all
then
that
later
too.
with Lee. Larry and I put out several different things too, and you know, it was just really interesting. But we were so creative together. We came up with a couple really interesting ideas, but by the time they got manufactured and we looked at them, we went, we don't like how they're manufacturing these things. So they went away. And Lee, meantime, was learning computers, which was the new thing, you know.
Desktop publishing and all that.
And doing desktop, you know, creation and, you know, learning Photoshop and all that. So...
he was doing also the manifestations seance at the time, right?
Which was in the back of Jack Sutherland's Sun Magic Shop, which is where we all hung out. Barry Shore and you know, and Lee and me and some other guys, and then, you know, every once in a while they would do something, and some of the big names ran through Sun Magic, you know, and so yeah, I mean, everywhere we turned, there were just things happening. And next thing we knew, we were like in the thick of it.
Wow. Yeah. Kind of it's interesting that there was a hotbed or a nest of mental activity that came out of Phoenix.
Yeah, that wasn't even planned. It were really, really interesting.
Just a point in time when things kind of coalesced and happened to work at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then eventually everybody kind of moved out in their different places, and you're the one kind of, I should say, stay behind. I mean, Larry's still there then as well.
Yeah.
But Mark has moved on, and Lee and everybody else.
Right.
Too,
Everybody's split in different directions pretty much, or if they're no longer on the planet.
Well, yeah.
We know that too. We lost Robert Blumley a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He did get the Jack's book done finally, thank goodness, because that was a lot of years of us talking and
telling him he should get it done.
Well, he was working on the doctor. He was just loved Jack's, and he was an attorney, so he had plenty of money. It wasn't an issue of that. So anytime he could get his hands on anything, he did.
Right. He was a big collector, I recall.
Huge collector, of everything. And
everything is true.
And so at a certain point, he wanted to do some things about Jack's, and then he found out, Copperfield bought this piece, and Kreskin had a bunch of stuff, and no way, Kreskin, and he battled it out, and nope, he couldn't get certain things.
The only way back then was really through eBay, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I guess they didn't have like Potter and Potter or
No,
other kind of auction houses or anything.
Right, right. So it was very eBay related. And then occasionally they get somebody on the phone, and say, hey, and so Blumley called Kress and said, hey, come on, I'm doing this book. Kreskin's like, sorry, no way. But so I was very glad that finally we got to see that book come to light. He'd worked on it for so many years, going back to the early days of the 6.5.
Yeah.
To finally see it come out,
Well, some of the things that are your wonder words, explain for those who are listening, saying you keep referring to this, Scott, so what exactly are wonder words? Yeah,
so wonder words came out of my psychological development as well as some esoteric studies. And I was very into influence at a very, very young. In elementary school, I was lugging around a tome by Orman McGill on hypnosis, right? Mm-hmm. So that was just the way I was, and
everyone else came around comic books, and you're carrying
I was, I had some of those too, but boy, on the playground, it was okay. While you're doing that, let me read Orman McGill and work on hypnosis. I tried to I did sometimes hypnotize kids in elementary school on the playground because I was practicing, and I dealt with bullies doing that.
How'd it work out?
And I talk about this in my new book, Kenton Principles, a little bit, but I had this bully. I'll tell you this quickly. This bully kept bugging me, right? And a couple of his pals, his underlings. And so one day I went, okay, I've just had it, so I'm going to see what I can do. So he went, and I said, oh yeah? Well, tonight you're going to have a dream. And it's going to be about a white stallion. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to like it at all. And the kids around him went, oh, white stallion, ooh. Right, making fun of me, and I walked off. Well, the next day, I see the kid on the playground with his minions, and he looks over at me, and he looks away, and he looks over at me again, and he looks away, and I went, oh, that's a good sign. I'm walking over.
He's not coming over to beat you up.
Right? So I said, hey, how was your dream? And he's like, just get away from me. Keep away from me. Don't mess with me anymore. And I went, I like this. This works.
Wow.
So suggestion and influence and these various mental states and things were always part of my makeup in this life. And I thought, okay, let me understand words, because I was kind of into words and meanings. And I had this wonderful teacher that would do funny things in junior high with words too. So that developed it even more. And eventually what I did was I started teaching. I started teaching when I was like 13 other kids, because I
teaching
magic, magic and mentalism too. But again, back then we just called it magic pretty much. And so I taught them about word influence and things. And many years later, I just wrote down like 13 of them and put them in a little thing as a handout for some of my students. And the point was, here are words you can use that cause people to believe something, whether it's true or not. And here's words you can use to get people to do things you need them to do.
By influencing people,
just
basically.
Influencing people by using certain words. Mm-hmm. And best of all, they seem like normal, ordinary, common words.
For example?
Well, I'd tell you about I can't do that here.
Okay.
So see, that's one of them, right? I used now, this word is now well known, but the word "but" is like the magical eraser. So anything you say before it kind of gets
Correct.
erased.
That's
right?
why I use the word "and."
Yes. And so when people would, for example, say, "Hey, can I shuffle the deck?" and it was a stacked deck or a memorized deck, I'd say, "You could, but it won't matter." And they go, "Okay, well, never mind." And I went, "Yeah, easiest false shuffle I do," right? So there were a lot of things like that. And then I would mention it to like Harry Blackstone Jr. when he was in town a few times, and he'd correct me on a word, it was things like that over the years. And then many years later, NLP kind of barely got known in certain circles. And I went, oh, well, they're finding out some of the things I've already been teaching my students. And some of their titles sound scientific, which is a good illusion, right? You want scientific sounding things. So I started using some of those titles.
And NLP, by the way, of course.
Yes, NLP is Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which, by the way, is a totally made-up term by two guys. And these two guys, when they got together, went, if we're going to model some of these things and make up labels and create stuff to get people to believe it, we need to make it sound scientific because we're kind of in clinical therapy, and let's make it sound clinical.
Right.
So they came up with Neuro-Linguistic Programming because that would cover anything. Neuro meaning the mind, linguistic, any kind of communication, programming, any kind of thing where you've got something stuck in people's heads, right?
Right.
So then that was it. Well, people, I studied Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Oh, come on, they made that up,
And they were making, I'm sure, big bucks and going on the lecture tour around the country with that.
Eventually they did, yeah. For a while it was controversial, but pretty soon, they learned how to use those words to work for them.
Particularly like with advertising, I would imagine, commercials and messages.
Absolutely, and in certain clinical situations, because they started wanting to try to convince
people cessation of smoking and
people that were crazy, quote unquote, right? Okay. They say, "Oh, you're not crazy, you really are Jesus," and they go, "I am?" I go, "Yeah. And by the way, I have a house, since you're a carpenter, that we need to get built down here." And they would pull things like that, right? Yeah. And so I went, "Yeah, that's how you do these things."
Yeah.
So, this goes actually, if you go way, way back to old arcane ideas, they really is the same stuff. It was taught in all the old mystery schools, use these words to get people to believe this, which causes them to create that reality.
Right.
So that's my background, right? It really didn't come from NLP at all. But people assume that because I used some titles. When I started teaching that to students more, I used some neuro-linguistic programming kind of titles. So this happened over many, many years. And then Doc Hilford said, you always do stuff for Weird Weekend. You should give a talk about that. And so Steve Shaw and a couple of his guys said, yeah, why don't you do that at one of the Weird Weekends? So I went, okay, sure. So I did, and of course I had nothing to sell. So I said, I'm going to do a book. I promise I'm going to do a book. Well, this went on for 3 years, and then finally my wife at the time said, you better get a book next year or they're going to kill you. And so I went, I don't have time to do that right now. So what can I do? And I thought, wait, I have, an 8-track recorder. Yeah, I'm a musician. I can just go record it. Right. And so I started doing audio recordings of what I knew. And that became something called Wonder Words. On
cassettes, wasn't it?
It was on cassettes, yeah. There were 4 cassettes that were like, 60 or 80 minutes long each. And originally, we didn't know what to call it. My friend Jeff McBride said, why don't you call it Magic Words? And I mentioned to Becker, and he goes, nah, that's too corny. Let's call it Wonder Words.
But it's a great title for a podcast.
Right. So perfect, right? So because Jeff, pushed it in that direction, but it was Larry's advertising thing that kicked in and went, let's go with Wonder Words. And we've already done
has that alliteration. And
that
of course,
alliteration.
And since he
with-
was an advertising guy, I'm sure he could give you good advice.
Yeah, right. So I went, I'm not arguing with you. I know how many millions you made off of advertising, right? And we did that with Killer. It was Colossal Killer because it was Kenton Knepper, and he wanted to get that alliteration, you know, which we changed Kenton's Close Call because that was 3 Ks, and we thought some people might get the wrong idea. So that's why that changed. So that became Wonder Words. And as soon as it started coming out, people were like, holy moly. Well, first, a whole lot of people went, this is crap. This can't work. This is nonsense. It doesn't work. Meantime, studio heads in Hollywood and script writers and all these other people were getting Wonder Words and using it. And so slowly, it took a few years, but slowly it started catching on, and then it became the baseline. And now you hear magicians and mentalists talk about, I use NLP and magic. It's like, no, you use Wonder Words. You heard about NLP. NLP wasn't even known in like motivational circles much. But after Wonder Words, I got a lot of feedback from people who said, hey, I was trained in NLP, but it really didn't click in until I got your Wonder Words, and I'm an NLP trainer, you know. So I noticed a lot of what I taught in Wonder Words crept into lots of other circles. And we did 2 more volumes. There's a 2nd volume and a 3rd volume, and they kept getting longer and more involved. But that's what Wonder Words is how to use words to really influence people. And then along the way, how to use not words, just thoughts, pictures, visual ideas.
Right, like where you're just kind of looking off in the distance and people are looking around. It's like all of a sudden, what's interested him over in that corner of the room?
What's got his attention over there, right? What's so important, you know, or a slight scowl or, you know, anything like that changes how the audience feels.
Which are things that actors do in movies and on theater all the time.
Right. So to change that and bump it up to the next level was what I was all about. And that goes back to my elementary school days of, okay, but Orman said, you know, you could think this and communicate it at a different level. And I've taken that and, you know, amped it up. So to me, it should be obvious, but everybody doesn't seem to get that. So let me tell everybody what I'm doing.
Yeah, I've noticed, for an example, in using something like that, or exactly that, I guess, when I'm in a close-up situation, performing in cocktails or restaurants or wherever, people don't know how to react when they see close-up. They laugh, are we supposed to applaud or whatever? And so you have to condition them by telling them beforehand, after you see this, you're going to say, that's amazing. You're going to want to tell people tomorrow, this is the most amazing thing you ever saw. And so after you finish that, the quick reaction is the last thing that they heard you say, that's amazing. Right. Because you told them in advance and conditioned them.
Right.
So that's kind of like exactly what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. In everyday life, people parrot back what is said around them constantly.
Kind of like mirroring when you're talking to people, as far as they're sitting across from you cross your legs, or the guy does too, or whatever. You mirror.
Right, yeah. So again, that's like an NLP term, mirroring, whatever, right? But in the old days, they just, Poe wrote about it. Poe said, you know, if you want to get in the mind of someone, you take the same stance they take. He would write. So all this goes way. When people cite NLP, that's cool, but it goes way back before any of that, you know. And so it comes down to, okay, if I can shift people, if I can do a few simple things to get people to respond the way I want, or to think what I want them to think, or to do or not do what I want them to, that's really useful, right?
Yeah, right.
And that became kind of what I got to be known for. They don't realize I wrote 80 card tricks. And it's like I can't, if I show somebody a card trick, they go, oh, well, I guess that's okay. It's like, are you kidding me? But it's coming from me. So, and I'm a mentalist. I can't do that. Yeah. I had that discussion with Eugene Berger one year. I said, Eugene, I don't know what to do. He goes, what's wrong, Ken? And I said, well, everybody thinks I'm a mentalist, and I'm not. It's not fair. I do all this other stuff. And he said, Kenton, you're a legend in mentalism. You got slapped with mentalist like I got slapped with the term bizarrist. He goes, just accept the label and go do what you want. And so that's kind of what happened.
It's good that you recognize that and then move on and say, okay, well,
Yeah.
I was about to ask that very question of whether you were a little bit perturbed about how you are accepted within the community for one particular thing, although it's like, hey, look at my body of work of other things that I've accomplished.
Right.
What's your thought on that?
I was talking to Gene Anderson, who created the great newspaper chair we all do, right?
Good point.
A couple years ago, and Gene said, Ken, I'm so happy we get to finally, talk. And I said, Gene, wait, I got to ask you something. Do you ever feel like, oh my God, they're doing the patter I wrote, 40 years ago?
Yes.
And he said, no. And I went, really? And he said, no, because I'm glad they still remember me. And I went, that's a really fair point, and that's true of musicians. So I went, okay, I get that. And, I've done an awful lot of other things. So again, by the urging, this is usually how things happen, of peers and some friends, I ended up taking a collection of other things I've done and put them into Kenton Principles, so people have the principles that I teach all my students. So no matter what you do, whether it's magic or mentalism or, anything in life that you need to be influential or have a way of presenting something, you can look at the principles and go, oh, yeah, and wait, that's right in here. All I have to do is associate this with this. I'm done.
Right.
And take the mystique out of the difficulty out of all those things like routining or how do I make this have meaning? Everybody says that, but nobody tells you how, right?
Right.
And so Kenton Principles is a big book about how, and it's more of a capture of who I really am. That's not just wonder words, right? It's everything else.
The book, of Kenton's Principles is about 850 pages. I mean, it's
800 pages, just under.
It's quite a tome.
Yeah.
And it does obviously go into a lot of detail about particular principles, but are there like 7 or 10 or 12 different points that you then elaborate on, or?
It's broken into like 5 or 6 sections, and
so what are the sections?
So, for example, one principle is association. We all go, well, we associate things together. I do that, but most people don't really understand the principles. But if you understand association, a lot of work becomes really easy. For example, let's say, you know what, I like rock and roll. Okay, fine. That's goody for you. Who cares, right? It was like, okay, but I want to do something about that in my show. All right. Well, now I have to go, what tricks do I do? Well, I eat fire. I do card tricks. I make a woman disappear. Okay, where does rock and roll relate to any of that? Fire. Oh, okay, done. Now I can, say, I was at a Kiss concert when I was X, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I can work rock and roll into... So it's simple. You go, oh, wait, I can just associate things like that easily? Yeah, right?
Right.
And when you get that, then it's easy to go from that to just expanding a little bit into routining and a little bit more into other things. And then to creating your own tricks. Lots of people think they aren't creative, or they think they're creative and they say, Kenton, my trick's totally different. I use a red deck, not a blue deck.
Yeah, that's creative.
I've literally had those emails, so I'm telling you.
Wow.
Seriously, yeah. Yeah, there's a magic dealer who I won't name, but put out a trick of mine as their own. And I said, hey, that's been out for like 10 years, and before the thing you mentioned was even around. And he goes, yeah, but you said people had to go to the mailbox and the magician or the mentalist dropped it into the mailbox themselves on the street. And in our version, they do it. The spectator does it.
Goes to the mailbox and
I
drops it
said,
in.
but you can do that with mine. They went, yeah, but you didn't write that, so it's different.
Wow.
And I went, this is just sad. Eventually, they ended up giving me credit. No money. They made a couple million off the idea.
Wow.
But I didn't get any of the money. But they eventually changed something. And that happens a lot.
Right.
Well,
one of the things that you do talk about, of course, in Principles is just exactly what you said, is it's easy. And I think a lot of people think, for example, I can't create, I can't sing, I can't do it because I wasn't born creative. I wasn't born as an actor or whatever. But I've always go back to something that Jeff McBride said is like creativity is a muscle you must exercise. And so you need to do that as frequently as you can.
Well, yeah, I will even say it's not true that you're not creative. The truth is every human being is creative. Sure. Now, they're not creative in the same way, thank God, or it would be really boring.
Very
Very
drab world.
But, if you think you're not creative, don't worry. Just don't worry. Well, I can't not worry. That's an act of creation. That's creativity. Right? It's something that hasn't happened, and you're imagining, well, this could, and then maybe that could happen. And what if this? That's all creative.
Yeah.
So if you ever worry, you're already creative.
Right.
Right? So it's not a whether or not you have to be creative. You already are creative. It's just the direction you want to point that thought process at. That's all. So you're already doing it. If you worry, then say, okay, well, what if I worried about how to do a trick better? What if I worried about how I could look cooler doing sponge balls or whatever it is, right?
Right.
That's all. That's all. It's very simple. You just, it's not hard work. It's not like I got to go exercise. No, you're already doing it. Just think about it slightly differently.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of it. I get this big reputation for being this big, deep philosophical thinker. And yeah, sure.
You do think deep.
Well, thank you. But I have all that. But it's my passion has been to take all this deep stuff I'm into and make it easy for people to grasp it so they can go, oh, wait a minute. You mean I can just do this? Yeah.
Right.
Just go do that. And that's why the Principles of the book finally came around, because it was like, look, all this stuff's a lot easier than you think.
They're trying to explain brain science, for an example.
Yeah. It's not, it's like, I joke, as a lot, when people go, but Kenton, I don't need to learn your stuff. Magic isn't brain surgery. And I always say, well, if it's not, you're doing it wrong. But you can affect people really deeply. But it doesn't mean it has to be difficult. It doesn't. It shouldn't be. And once you take the veils off your eyes and realize how simple it is to do all those things, everything changes. Even real life changes.
And the important thing is, I think, just to jump in and do it, because there is a fear of failure. But if you're kind of doing it in your own home to practice something and want to see if something works, why not? It's just like, again, I think sitting down and brainstorming with yourself, essentially. Right. And there are no bad ideas, and there's no one in the room except you who is going to say, oh, that wasn't a good idea. But first of all, write them all out, and try these ideas. I
had this conversation with someone just about 2 hours ago, and they said, well, I'm pretty good at this, but then again, I can't really write the way I should write, because I went, okay, just stop. You're editing before you're even beginning.
Yeah.
So don't. Put all the crap down.
Stream it.
You go back and you edit later. Everybody knows that. Don't do that. Just go stream, whatever. And he goes, yeah, but you were writing all these books through all those years. It's easy for you to say that. And I went, yeah, you know how? I sat at my Ouija board. You call a computer keyboard and sit there and channel stuff through, right? And go for hours on end. And then later I go back and edit.
Right.
So anybody can do that.
Well, that's what a writer does. So for a writer to write, you have to write. And I learned that so many years ago, just sitting before the keyboard, as you said, and just putting things down. And sometimes things will come to you as just a free-flowing stream of consciousness, certainly, and other times that you have to slave over it. And I can come back to that each week and kind of fine-tune and tweak it. And so as I'm writing articles, it could just sometimes immediately pop into my head, but most times we'll come back to it and tweak it some more.
Yeah, you don't worry about it. You go, okay, well, I'm stuck there, so I'm leaving that alone for now, and I'll do this. And then what's really fun is, you go back to edit, and you go, I need to fix this, so let me write a little bit more. And then you go, oh, wait a minute. Here's an even better way.
That's right. That's right.
It's just
which is the thing, like I think with lecture notes in particular, like with magicians, they are never finished with something. I had this conversation with Michael Goddard, who is an artist, and I wanted to correlate his painting and sculpting with what magicians do as an art, performing art, basically. As a performing art similar to a portraiture artist or whatever kind of a thing. In other words, when you go to a museum, Michael, and you see, or a gallery, and you see paintings of yours there, do you feel like you want to take a brush and go, if I could put one more stroke right there? And he said, pretty much when I'm done with it, he said, yes, I do think that. However, when I'm done with it, I'm moving on to something else. A magician, on the other hand, and I think actors as well, always whenever they're performing, the next time they're thinking, I can actually, if I move this way, or if I use this phrase or this inflection in this presentation, or when I deliver this line or whatever, it will have something else to it. So when all of us are buying these lecture notes, a lot of times the magicians who are lecturing are saying, well, here's something that's not in the notes that I've since added to that.
Yeah, right.
So it's a continuation. My point being is that you should, most magicians, as Vernon and others have said, stop thinking too soon. Right. They don't continue to work on and thinking of ideas. So the point is, again, going back to brainstorming with yourself, I guess it's important to continue to grow by not being afraid to try an idea, and building on stuff.
Right. It seems counterintuitive, but it is a fact. And again, a lot of things I know I've learned from music, being a musician and talking to famous musicians, because that art often applies to other things. And one of the things that lots of famous musicians have said is, well, when we first started, the first 5-10 years, we sucked. We were horrible. We were lousy. Oh my God, we were so bad. Dave Grohl to this day, talks about when they first got together in Nirvana, all we could do was make noise. Mm-hmm. It was, your ears would be bleeding. It was so bad. But all we did to make it right is keep playing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That should tell you something. Here's a major guy in music who's worth a lot of money, and self-admittedly says we sucked for years, but we just kept doing it. If we could give ourselves that kind of permission, just imagine where we might be.
Yeah, so right? What I hear you saying, obviously, is never give up.
So don't give up. I remember my dear friend Richard Webster and I were talking once about cold reading, and he said, Kenton, don't you think it's a little like hypnosis? And I said, well, in lots of different ways. What are you thinking about, Richard? And he said, well, how in people read hypnosis books and then they go, this is cool. I better read a little more before I go out and do it. Mm-hmm. And then they finally eventually go out and do it and go, seriously? That's all it takes? What? I wish I would have known that 20 years ago, right? He said the same thing's true with readings. He goes, once you do it, you go, really? It's that easy? Yeah. And it's the doing is where we stop ourselves. And sure, we want to get better. But people, have permission to suck for. It's okay. Just go do, because the more you do, the better you're going to get. And you're going to find out earlier, hey, some of this is a lot easier than I thought it was.
Well, some of the things affect people's lives more than others. If you're doing magic, it's like Michael Lamar would say, it's bubble gum for the eyes. If you're doing a psychic reading of someone and talking about their past and their present and their future, some people put a lot of stock into that could change their mind and their lives.
Well, then it is brain surgery. So if you do anything, even as entertainment, right, that has anything involved with readings or whatever, I hope at least you have Wonder Words or Completely Cold or something. So you realize you have a responsibility. At that point, we have what I call patter karma, right? Which is you're putting something into people's heads. Now you're responsible for that.
That's right.
And it doesn't matter if you're saying QAnon is real on stage or you're saying, I'm sorry, you're going to have an accident on June the 5th. You are responsible for all that. On the other hand, you're also responsible to say, Scott, there are a few things that are going to be a little tricky, a little difficult. And I know you had some personal stuff we won't get into here, that's difficult. But the way you come out of that is so beautiful. You're going to even surprise yourself in the next year.
Good way of putting it.
And so that, as good as you feel now about some of those things and the parts you're still working through, a year from now you're going to go, you know what? Hey,
he was right.
Yeah, this worked out better than I expected. And I would have never seen that coming, but it made sense. And now I see why I had that journey. Wow, right?
Right.
And now you've made somebody's life better. So that's where we have, as entertainers in Magic of Mentalism, the wonderful emotive power that musicians have by playing a chord, right? We can't just go, ta-da, I entertained you is fine. But musicians do something else usually. You know, they move you, they get you in some level. And
that was the anti-ta-da you were talking about.
Yeah, and so the real, we have this ta-da thing in Magic of Mentalism, which especially younger generations now think it's kind of phony and silly and ego-based. But you can do that and still relate it to people, and it's meaningful. Then people go, oh, yeah, but I love the meaning of that. I'll take that with me. Well, that's what we all want, right? As artists of any kind. And so
it's not for the immediate gratification so much as it is the later gratification. So that's the anti-ta-da, basically, that people are carrying with them.
Right. And anti-ta-da is kind of hard to discuss in a short period. But again, it's in Kenton Principles. But like I did Time Machine last night, a very truncated version, but I did this trick that Larry and I came up with, and Doc Hilford.
I've seen that Doc Hilford's version of that with the coin, and you obviously go back to England.
So this is where it came from. So Larry and I created this. Larry and I created this on this plane.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
We didn't follow
that wasn't
through
the Southwest Miracle, is it?
No, the Southwest Miracle and Time Machine.
Oh, okay.
Because that was the pirate coin. That he said, how do I get a date on the pirate coin? So that's where this started.
Okay.
And then, we went there. We didn't finish the thought. Well, Larry had this envelope trick out where sealed a hair mail or whatever it was called. Anyway, to switch coins. So he decided he would put that out on a video that would be kind of like what I told him with the date, but using hair mail to switch out the coin and blah, blah, blah. And Larry gave us these videos, and we went home, and Doc had a copy, and I had a copy, and we both watched it and went, hey, wait a minute, this is the thing I was talking to Larry about, except he's using hair mail, which is awful. And I know what I would do. I would do this. So Doc and I call each other, and we both kind of went, we had the same solution, right? That this is what it was.
Right.
So that's where Time Machine came from.
Which is a great routine, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. So it began on the airplane with Larry and I. So the reason for doing Time Machine last night, even though it was short, was to get it through people's heads that something happened that I'm not sure I can compute that in the middle of a 3.5-hour show with all these magicians doing eye candy and flashy stuff. But a day or a week from now, you're going to go, wait a minute, the guy thought of a date and it was on the coin.
He's been holding his hand the whole time.
Yeah, which he held in his hand the whole time. What was that?
Right.
I mean, the other stuff was cool, but wait a minute. And it's that slow burn, that stays in people's heads that later you go, wait, that's haunting.
Not just the person who is experiencing it, which is strong, but also in the audience going, wait a minute. And they're talking to the guy also, and he's confirming that as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, which is really fun. And I pulled up a magician last night from the audience who was with a well-known magician in the D.C. area. And I did it with him. And when I talked to him, he had no idea I was going to work with him. When I talked to him yesterday, he said, it's still really bugging me.
That is a great follow-up.
Because I was looking right at the coin.
Sure.
I still don't know. I don't get it. And I went, great.
Love it. It is. I have not done that in probably 6-7 years. It was, a long time ago. And I'd forgotten how strong that was. And then when you did it, I thought, that was really, really good.
Yeah, it's so spooky to have somebody hold a coin, a modern coin, and then say, think of a year and,
Where's that available? Now we're getting deep into the woods on this one particular trick. Where can people find that if they wanted to?
It's in Wonderwords. It first finally got published in Wonderwords Volume 2. It's in the book in Wonderwords 2.
And they can find those where?
You can get
Wonder
all
Wizards?
the downloads at wonderwizards.com. Yeah, my website.
Why do they call it Wonder Wizards instead of Wonder Words? That was always taken? Or?
Well, no, because at the time, Gene Urban and I were doing a lot of work as Dining with Wizards, and we had a company of the Wizards of Phoenix. And so when I branched out on my own, it was like I wanted to keep the wizard thing because so many people related that to me. And then Wonder Words, so we just combined them together and went Wonder Wizards. And
Gotcha.
That was it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And now lots of people like that word wonder, but at the time it was very unique for us. So,
Right.
you know.
Well, what's on the horizon then right now as far as what Kenton Knepper's? I mean, you got this big book you finally completed, of course. And
Yes,
so, I
it
mean,
just got done.
Yeah.
Well, you know, somebody said, well, I guess that's, you know, that's kind of it for like compiling things and everything you've written. It's like, no, not even close. You know? I have, you know, mind reading lessons 1 and 2 are out, but 3 and 4 aren't done yet. I mean, they've been written a long time ago, but those have to get on hardbound books. And there are lots of tricks and things that nobody seems to know anything about. I was talking to Larry Haas about that several years ago, and he said, I don't think people know like any of your, you know, close-up creations or any of that.
Well, one
stuff.
of them, of course, the close-up killer was in Psychological Subtleties 2, I believe. Didn't we manage
Yeah,
that?
yeah, there was
that.
we had a version of that, and there's also a Kenton's Calendar, which goes back to
That's correct.
pre-Wonder Words days, and a couple of
You
those
shared that
things.
also with us.
Yeah, that's in Psychological Subtleties. So there's a lot of those things that have been around, but there's a lot of like right now. A coin in a sealed tin is like, you know, or a personal item in a sealed tin is big again. I've had 2 versions of that have been in print for like 30 years.
Wow.
But most people don't know too much about it. And I do any of them in a talk or anything. A magician's like, what is that? It's like, come on, look, I know, I don't know a tape in, you know, 98 at one point, one of them did, you know, things like that. But most people don't know those again because
they think of you as a mentalist,
they think
not
of me a mentalist.
as a magician.
I had a coin and balloon that Sankey said if I'd seen that first, I would have never put my coin and balloon into my book.
Oh yeah,
and that became more popular, known as cell phone and balloon. Using the same method, but making it a lot more obvious.
Did Danny Garcia come up with Under Pressure, that particular thing you're talking about, the cell phone?
It's the cell phone that goes in a balloon, and it's and originally, the moves of all that stuff was my coin in balloon.
Coin in balloon.
Yeah, it was a coin in balloon. And actually, the original coin in balloon, which again was published and out there, and then eventually made it on a videotape in '98, so way before cell phone and balloon or any of that stuff, was you know, a clear balloon that you borrowed a coin, and it was like a long animal balloon kind of thing, and you and it would go up into the little bubble, and you blow up the balloon, and you could see their marked coin in the balloon, and then you would rip the coin out of the balloon, you know, tear the balloon and take the coin out so they could check it and make sure it was theirs, and then you'd restore the balloon. And it, you know, it fried people forever. I mean, way before we published. And, you know, pals like J.C. Wagner and those guys were like, what the hell are you doing? You know, what is this stuff? So again, like Gene Urban had this house in Paradise Valley in Arizona. He knew JC. JC and I, you know, met. JC ended up moving into the house with us. JC and I would stay up.
Really?
For yes, quite a while, for a year or so. With a, you know, that was back when I used to drink. So there would be a fifth of whatever on the table, and we would be up until 3 a.m. working on whatever.
Yeah.
Every day, every night, pretty much for like a year. And JC used to write all the notes down. And right before he passed, I had said to JC, hey, do you still have that notebook? And he said, yeah, I have the notebook with all our stuff. And I went, really? And then I stopped and I went, oh, wait, this is back in the days. I said, can you make sense out of any of it? And he said, yeah. I said, really? He said, yeah, one trick.
There's one still good in there. I can remember what we did.
And I had a torn and restored card that I'd done since 70s. And when JC saw it, he went, oh, my God. He goes, that's the second best torn and restored card I've ever seen. Meaning his was of course,
great.
first.
I still do that. His is great.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful. So, you know, I was a student of John Mendoza's for years. Spent 3-4 days a week up at his house every week.
Did he live in Phoenix also?
No, this was back in the Midwest. So
okay, I thought he was in St. Louis, or where was he?
He was, but before that he lived in Davenport, Iowa, and I drove up and stayed at his house every day and night for 3 or 4 days in a row, and then drove back to Cedar Rapids.
Another great thinker, particularly about cards.
What a brilliant thinker, and just so ingenious, and And Teller still points to like Mendoza's close-up presentation as a really important.
That's one of my favorite books.
book.
If people say what are in your top 10, yeah, close-up
Yeah.
presentations is my at least top 5 recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, radically, and John, God bless him, John, he was like a no-nonsense dude, right? And he knew my, kind of different leanings of things, but he, was like, that's who you are, that's fine, I don't care.
Yeah.
So John was no nonsense. And at a certain point, John said to me, let me, you keep coming up with tricks. What are you working on now? And I'd show him something, and I remember this one day, it was so devastating. He said, those are really good tricks, but that one's Marlowe's and that one's Vernon's. And I went, seriously? And he went, no. He goes, don't be upset. I want you to understand, you are thinking at the level of Marlowe and Vernon.
It was a compliment then, too,
Yeah,
the way that,
he said, so, and I know you didn't take that by steal. This is you coming up with stuff.
Yeah.
He said, so maybe you should do a book. And I went, oh. And he's the one that pushed me over the edge to recognize that my creative stuff that I'd had since I was a little kid was important enough to be out there. So if it wasn't for Mendoza, that happening in Iowa, those steps wouldn't have been made. So my torn and restored card, the coin and balloon, all that stuff would have been in a book that John was writing for me. And that was back in the old days, which means he wrote it on the typewriter, and then we'd take it to a printer's, and he didn't have copies. He'd take it to the printer. And the printer burned down.
Oh, my gosh.
And
with his manuscript.
And that was the end of my book.
Wow.
Yeah. And
what
then
a story.
A couple of years later, I moved to Phoenix.
Had pursued a different path.
Well, yeah, which was now really funny. This has never hit me before until this moment, Scott. But because of your influence, I just got the humor of the fact that the legend was always that book burned. And then I moved to Phoenix, where you rise again out of the ashes of the burning, right?
Exactly.
So there we go.
And so you have.
So I did.
I think that's probably a good place to wrap right there then, too. Wow. A man who has risen. So I always conclude by asking my guests what your magic word is. What is your phrase, or what is your mantra, your chi? What do you live by? What's important? Philosophy?
My biggest philosophy is a sense of real magic. And so for me, that's it. I'm always looking for the real stuff.
Look for the real magic.
Look for the real magic, because it's there. And science confirms this all the time. That the goofy things people used to think turns out to have some merit. Doesn't mean everything nonsense people tell you is true, but if you keep looking for the real wonder, the real magic behind things, it's there.
And you can experience the wonder.
And you can experience the wonder anytime you want. Yeah.
Well, it's been wonderful. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate that.
Thank you, my friend. Great to be with you.
Well, this has been great. And so I'm at a loss of words right there for just a second.
Wonder Words does that to you. It takes words away, too. You got to be careful. Look at me. 1, 2, 4, 3. There you go.
And yeah, it fills in the blank.
There you go.
Over there. So yes, what have you done? I mean,
I know this is the trance thing. I'm used to it. It's okay. Here, seriously, watch. Yeah. There you go. Isn't wonder wonderful?
It is.
Yeah.
It was just like your name just went out of my mind, even.
Yeah. This is what I love about silent influence, because you just do really powerful things. And it gives people moments that are beyond, right, what we know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I hope that you appreciate that moment of zen, listeners, as
Yes.
we thank our guest, Kenton Knepper. Thank you very much, Kenton.
Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, my mind just kind of just thinking about all that stuff. Okay, well, thank you for your thoughts. Thank you also for that moment of zen.
Absolutely.
So for the Magic Word Podcast, that was Kenton Knepper. This is Scotty out. Okay. What the heck happened there? I just do not know. I've never experienced a brain aneurysm quite like that. I mean, I completely forgot his name. I was, again, so enthralled and invested in our conversation and listening to what he was saying and processing this in my brain of what we had been talking about for the previous hour up until the very ending as far as what his magic word was going to be and everything else. And as I was staring at him, where we were seated in the room, he had light behind me. He was towards the window, or I was facing him and the window, so I had this bright light that was kind of framing the silhouette of him for most of our conversation as I was looking at him. So he had this kind of aura about him, I guess, if you will. And for some reason, just towards the end, I could not think of his name. Kenton Knepper just wouldn't come to mind as I stared at him. And so with his help, as you could tell, he just calmed me down, got my brain to switch back in and reboot, basically. took a moment for that computer to reboot in my brain and get started again. Anyhow, Kenton, wonderful. Oh my gosh, you're the man. You are the man. So many great thoughts and wonderful words that you shared with us. Those were wonderful wonder words, you wizard, you. So thank you very much for being my guest here this week. It's always a pleasure to see you, even though, as we mentioned, it is so infrequent. As we got to talking after the podcast was over, we were kind of sharing some other moments in which we had shared some time together back in Phoenix so many years ago when Jay Sankey had come through, and we all got together, and we were after a lecture and joined at someone's home, and we were working on some different ideas and also hanging out with Larry Becker in Phoenix and everything. Anyhow, he's just a wonderful guy, and we don't get together nearly often enough. And he doesn't attend conventions very often, so you don't get the opportunity to hear him speak or see him very often. So I hope you enjoyed this particular episode of the Magic Word Podcast. And I also want to encourage you that if you did like this, and if you like our podcast in general, you can really help us grow if you will just give us 5 stars and some nice comment. If you listen to it on iTunes or whatever is your preferred method of downloading and listening to these podcasts, I'm sure there's some way of rating us, and that if you enjoyed this, 5 stars would be great. If you can't give us 5 stars, keep listening, and eventually, hopefully, you'll get there, because I prefer to have 5 stars or nothing. So if I've got nothing, then I've got to keep working a little bit harder. But I'm going to continue to work hard and also provide you with some good content. We have something wonderful coming up over the next couple of weeks I know you're going to enjoy, and there's going to be keeping on a theme then as well. And if you join us by subscribing to the pod letter, then you will know who's going to be coming up from week to week, who we're going to be talking to, and that kind of a thing. So if you are not subscribed to the pod letter, go to themagicwordpodcast.com, and there will be a little pop-up there where you can fill it in, give your email and your name, and then you can subscribe and join us. And each week you will get that information. Well, until next week, stay well, get booked, and remember to look for real magic because, well, it's out there. This is Scotty out. Sorry for that little short delay. I had another brain fart.